director at the Open Britain campaign, which is campaigning for the closest possible relationship with Europe. In December of 2015, I'd moved on to the Stronger In campaign as it was then, and we were literally building a campaign from scratch. I remember in December of 2015, we had a conference call with 6 people on it, and that was where we were at that stage. And within a period of 7 months, was polling day. They kind of threw that policy. It was supposed to be September. So I guess the first lesson of recent times is don't call snap elections because they don't work. And certainly with the referendum, we weren't planning for it to be that soon. We called it. In terms of the numbers of volunteers, activists that we were able to mobilise, we were able to do it in big numbers. And I think that was a surprise to us all. And one of the interesting things that we found from that campaign is that about 20%, we reckon, of the people who were coming forward had never campaigned before. And so for the first time, really, we saw that issues were, transcending party politics, but people were becoming engaged in a campaign on an issue that they felt passionate about, but had no experience of campaigning at all, which has its pros and its cons. But we lost. So what did we learn from that particular campaign? An awful lot. One of the things that we didn't do, and this is where I will compare it to the 2015 general election, one of the problems with our referendum campaigns, we didn't run a smart campaign, we ran a big campaign. We were in the wrong places. And the reason we were in the wrong places, we were told this was all about turning out voters, when actually we should have been running a persuasion campaign. But our polling, all of that data that was coming through proved to be wrong. We weren't picking up what was happening. There was a group of voters that were motivated and were going to vote for the first time, who'd never voted for the election before. We didn't pick that up. And so we were actually running a great campaign, but the wrong campaign. And so if I compare that back to sort of 2015, we didn't have the data that we needed to run a highly targeted campaign on the referendum. It came far too late. It was high visibility because we didn't have the data and the data-driven campaign. And that was something that in 2015 really drove the campaign forward.
I've got a couple of moments seared in my mind from my last few years of reporting. One from the campaign trail, which was a lot less glamorous than it sounds, mainly because I spent most of it in the Rust Belt. So sort of 2 years sort of eating fast food and strip malls left me with an epiphany in a car park of a DIY store, talking to a guy about why he was going to vote Trump. And he said, well, he's nuts, obviously, but I want to see what happens. And it kind of took me a while to process that, but that sense of sort of rolling the dice, what can possibly go wrong? This was in a sort of depressed former steel town in eastern Ohio, and you kind of looked around and you kind of thought, maybe he's got a point, what else could go wrong? There was another moment in the referendum, which I didn't witness, but someone recounted to me that I felt similarly seared in my mind, was a woman during the debate was being told, well, Brexit obviously trashed GDP. And she said, but that's your bloody GDP, it's not my GDP. And this was a woman in Newcastle who again felt that capitalism was not working for her, and she was not going to be swayed by an argument that said it was going to make everybody poorer when she already felt pretty poor. And I think that is so much of the backdrop to what we're seeing at the moment, that particularly accentuated by the generational shifts. We hear a lot about generation rent, but people who are never going to own their own house are not going to be swayed by arguments, the same sort of arguments as the people of my generation. Despite all of that, politics and journalism, to my mind, have never been more exciting. I've just come back from Manchester and Brighton, and both Tory and Labour conferences were more vibrant than I've ever remembered them. And the same with journalism. I mean, we're reaching audiences that we've never have dreamed of reaching. The Guardian now daily has over 10 million unique visitors to our site, 10 million people coming. I write the most obscure stories. Come to a story in the States, a really obscure Supreme Court case, not one of the big ones. Got over 1 million readers. We have a podcast on Brexit that we'd like to get really geeky. We try and get as geeky as we can, and we can't put the buggers off. And we have 140,000 people tuning into this podcast every month. So people are excited, and we are able to reach people. It's all in a screwed up way that's not making anybody any money. In terms of messaging, one is got to be more human. I think there's a really good contrast at the moment in the Tory party between the way that Theresa May approaches communication and, say, people like Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg. She is not human. Our sketch writer John Crace coined this fantastic term for her, the Maybot, which sort of stuck during the election. I think it really encapsulates that sense of this woman. I'm sure underneath she's lovely, but as a communicator comes across, I'm afraid to say, the way many companies come across, in a very, very unhuman way. Boris and Mogg are mad, but they're engaging, and I think that's just a vital lesson at the moment. The other lesson I would say is we've all got to communicate at Twitter speed. I'm really struck whenever I cover an event like today's Brussels talks or whatever. The commentariat has already made its mind up on Twitter about what to think about something before it's even over. I mean, it's literally, the debate is happening in real time now.
So we've had a view from the perspective of politics, we've had a view from the perspective of the press, actually a view from the perspective of a man who's worked in business and consulting. So over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to start with a statement of the bleeding obvious, actually, which is that politicians only have to get elected once every few years. And generally speaking, as we've seen, that means that after they're elected, they get the opportunity to tear up the manifesto on day one and then with impunity carry on as they are. I think companies are in a different space. Companies, in essence, have to get re-elected every day to be able to validate their goods and services. And I think as a consequence of that, the political arena has the ability and the freedom to be able to pursue techniques and ideas that are probably a little bit more radical and push the boundaries further than I think companies, generally speaking, have the opportunity to do. And I'm sort of talking very specifically about platforms like Cambridge Analytica, if you guys are aware of that, which is the kind of behavioural profiling stuff that Trump claims actually won him the election. If you are looking to try and engage your workforce, then the top-down model doesn't really work very well. And actually you are far, far better to try and get your employees to create their own content, because the reality is it's far more compelling. The man and woman in the streets being bombarded with information right now, we're tuning it out, and we're resorting back to something far more primitive in terms of how we make decisions about the products we want to buy and about the politicians that we might want to vote for. And I think that's kind of primarily heuristics, and it's a very emotional quotient.
We define authenticity as the gap between expectations and experience, and it's worth thinking about what people expect. Most research looks at how people's experiences are. You know, how was the meal, how was the car, how was the holiday. It's only really relevant if you look at what people expect before they go into the experience. And the expectations of corporates have changed dramatically in the 5 years or so that we've been doing this research. And what we find is that just over half of an organisation's reputation, 51% on average across the board, is driven by our view of products and services. Which, when you consider that 90+% of all communication spend, if you include marketing, would be on products and services, it's only just over half. And the rest, the 49%, by my maths, is two things. One is management behaviour, so the extent to which people feel your management are ethical and other related things. And the second is your impact on the community or society in which you work. So you've got almost half of a company's reputation being driven by expectations on which the company spends very little time and money at the end of the day. And that is a mistake. We asked people where they get what they would consider to be a credible source of information. It will come as no surprise to you that the bottom two are politicians, 4%, credible, or people consider credible, and leaders of companies, 11%. 11%. Okay, the top two by a country mile are knowledgeable friends and family, as defined how, and employees of companies. Top two. So don't waste your money on chief executives. Okay? What you need are fitters, or assembly workers, or salespeople or whatever. They will get your message across. So it's going to change the way that companies work. I found it, companies are going to have to work out loud. Work out loud, show your workings, as you put it, which I think is very smart. And that's going to be a struggle because it's going to be loss of control.
I'm going to wrap up with some of the trends that we're seeing at NationBuilder and talk a little bit about the future of campaigning. For those of you who don't know NationBuilder, we provide what we believe are leaders. So leadership is a big topic of ours, but we provide leaders with the software and the tools that they need to do whatever it is they're meant to do in the world. We've worked with both sides of the Brexit campaign. We've just finished wrapping up the French presidential elections, where we work with 7 of the French presidential candidates. And we also work with companies like the Mozilla Foundation and All Saints. And I think this is the biggest lesson that we've learned at NationBuilder, which is campaigns is no longer something only the political elite do. We talk with brands and companies and corporates day in, day out, and when we bring up the word campaigning or campaign, they often say, oh, no, that's not what we're doing. Well, actually, if you've got an objective, you've got a goal, and you've got a set of processes to get there, and you've got a bunch of people who are going to help you get there, you're campaigning. Build a community. The most important here thing, and I think it's been alluded to a couple of times tonight, is putting people first really does generate value. Your company is nothing but the people who buy from you, your services, your products, or help you knock on doors to get elected. Call to action. This is the one thing that people forget constantly. They build beautiful websites that don't do anything. They send out newsletters to thousands of people that don't ask for anything. The biggest mistake that we have seen in both political and corporate engagement and campaigns is people want to engage with you, but they need to know how, and they need to know what you need them to do. We saw this in, again, the traditional political space. Digital didn't replace canvassing, door knocking, pub meetings, and I think it's the same in the corporate space. Look at digital as this whole new entity that adds to your existing toolkit. The fourth and last element is what I mentioned previously, is the technology that we have today allows us to do things much more rapidly, but most importantly allows you to do things at scale like we've never been able to do before. This is what's allowed us to do pan-European campaigns. It allows brands to get the word out there, allows brands to create communities at a global and international level.